Who doesn't love The Legend of Zelda? It's a franchise filled with mystery and adventure, but everyone has their favorite parts of the games, like the story or the soundtrack. For me, the dungeons are the standout sections of these games, and I must say heading into a new dungeon with the expectation that I'm going to play through it in one sitting, because that's how I play, it truly feels like an event is about to occur. Above all else, Zelda's dungeons are brilliantly designed and are all unique. Now, the dungeons that I will be counting down will be ranked by their atmosphere, use of elemental theme, puzzles, layout, item, mini-bosses, and boss, with a heavy emphasis on puzzles, theming, and items. Please keep in mind that you may not agree with me, and that's perfectly fine. Also, please understand that all of this is my opinion, and I am entitled to it. So, I think that even for Zelda fans, there will be a few surprises here. And now we shall begin. Here's a very underrated dungeon. The Woodfall Temple is the first dungeon of Majora's Mask with the Swamp and Shadow theme. After playing the Sonata of Awakening at the swamp, a large old temple emerges from the toxic water. Link enters the temple to gain the mask of the boss and to save the Deku Princess. The Woodfall Temple, being an awesome temple name by the way, is very different from other first dungeons in the series as it's not simple puzzle-wise, nor is this temple excluded from difficult enemies and environmental hazards. I think many would agree with me saying that Majora's Mask had a great theme to it overall, one of danger and unsettling tones throughout, and those aspects of the game shine through to be in the very first temple of the game, which I am impressed by. Let's talk about the Woodfall Temple's atmosphere and aesthetics. The temple has very detailed wall carvings with tribal imagery, which gives the place a very spooky atmosphere. The piece that plays in the background has the same atmosphere with light percussion and a person chanting. This music piece is very simple and repetitive, but it never lost its meaning for me. The Woodfall Temple, like the swamp surrounding the outside, is overrun with toxic liquid and it has a very bright pink color to it. It really adds to the atmosphere of the dungeon. Now, the layout of the dungeon is fairly simple, but it encourages a little backtracking thanks to the fairies, the stray fairies, which I think is good. Link will need the Deku Mask to help him reach doors up high or out of reach, and he can do so using flower spots located throughout the dungeon. Hopefully you are good with the timing of the glide, otherwise you'll probably be landing in pink toxic water, and that's not good. The item of the dungeon is a real hit, the Hero's Bow. Finally, a Zelda game where you can just skip the slingshot. Simply awesome. The bow functions perfectly, and it's something you'll be using throughout the rest of the game. The Woodfall Temple houses some pretty interesting puzzles for being the first dungeon of Majora's Mask. Some of my favorites are the cross-section with the block in the way, the room that is pitch black and you must use a Deku Stick to light all of the torches, and I especially love the room with the flower giving off toxic water. What you need to do is use your Hero's Bow and time a shot that you can light the flower on fire. Once you do that, the entire Woodfall Dungeon's water becomes purified. Now you can swim in it as Link, or just like before, skip across it as Deku Link. The swamp vibe you get from the Woodfall Temple is really beautiful, and the shadow elements give the temple a bit of an edge. The mini-boss that gets you the Hero's Bow is the terrifying little frog riding a turtle. Well, anyway, it's really easy. The turtle can be taken out using the flower spots, and the frog can be damaged by the bow. Lastly to talk about is Odalwa, the boss. Odalwa is a really fun boss with a lot of great attacks, and the boss room is simply amazing looking. Odalwa chants at you to summon moths, which are a pain to deal with, and beetles, who are very easy to deal with. He's vulnerable to the Hero's Bow while he's chanting, so feel free to get some extra hits in. All you really need to do is get in a flower spot and shoot up, then drop a Deku Nut on the big eye. Once that's done, you can approach it, the dazed Odalwa, and slice its eye until you damage him. Rinse and repeat, and the Woodfall Temple is complete. So now Link can rescue the Deku Princess. Overall, I think the Woodfall dungeon is really unappreciated in the Zelda community, and it really holds up in the series despite being a first dungeon. This dungeon has a very love-or-hate relationship with people. The Wind Temple is really solid if a bit complex. Let's start with the layout, and then we will discuss the atmosphere. The Wind Temple has a very strange layout with many side rooms and side paths, with a giant tube-like structure in the middle of the dungeon, with a million paths and rooms. The key is not getting lost, and is either going from bottom to top or top to bottom, with a clockwise or counterclockwise rotation. If you follow that, you'll be fine. The Wind Temple, like the Woodfall Temple, has a repetitive theme targeted towards the atmosphere. The Wind Temple has a unique and off-putting atmosphere with sentimental and warm elements to it. Speaking of warm elements, the lovely character Makar joins Link on his adventure throughout the temple. Makar can plant seeds to make trees grow, which Link can hookshot onto. Oh right, I guess because I just said it, I might as well talk about it. The hookshot is the dungeon item, and it functions just as you'd expect it to. It has a good range to it this time around as well. Makar is really helpful and fun to control with the flying ability and a cute running animation. I'd love to give credit to the Wind Temple for using a lot of Link's weapons for the whole game as well. The elemental theming is obviously wind, and I would even argue some light elements, but just for aesthetics. The mini-boss is rather lame, let me just say. The red Wizrobe appears, and it looks like a great fight is about to occur, but all it does is spawn enemies and becomes an enemy rush. I guess there isn't that much to say about the Wind Temple, so let's talk about Mulgera. The epic boss fight is easy but fun. As soon as Mulgera's tongue is visible, thanks to it resting from flying in the sand, Link can hookshot its tongue and swing away. The Wind Temple is a really solid dungeon that took risks with its tubular and complex design, and for me at least, it pulled off nicely. It didn't take long for us to revisit Majora's Mask, but we have the second dungeon from the game ranked at number 13. So, the Snowhead Temple. I used to hate this dungeon as a child, but it really grew on me starting with the 3D remake on Majora's Mask. The Snowhead Temple is the highest point in Termina, and basically is a giant mountain covered in snow and ice. The elemental theming is mainly ice and snow, of course. The atmosphere of the dungeon doesn't grow throughout your time traversing the area. Simply from the start, you get a cold and isolated vibe, and the entire temple uses this. Heading to the lower areas, you'll find lava and lots of unfrozen rocks. These remnants of Snowhead's past are interesting, but are not threatening. Why? Well, Goron Link can stand in lava just fine. Speaking of Goron Link, the mask comes in handy with all of the ramps found in the temple. If you get a head start, Goron Link can fly right off the ramps to reach new heights. The Snowhead Temple's puzzles are a little weak though. There are many block puzzles with few stumpers. However, to compensate for this, the temple is built vertically, making accidental backtracking common and getting lost easier. You can tell that the Wind Temple took lots of inspiration from this one. Goron Link is essential for hitting switches to open new areas, while a normal Link can use the dungeon item to explore. The rest of Majora's Mask's temples feature elemental arrows for dungeon items, which makes the hero's bow look even more important. Obviously, Link is given the fire arrows. To obtain them, of course, you need to fight the mini-boss, which is a Wizrobe. This thing teleports around the room and casts devastating spells on Link. All you need is the hero's bow and some good reflexes, and then you'll have the fire arrows. After taking some damage, the Wizrobe will swap clones of itself, and Link must find the real one and shoot it. Fairly simple, but fun. A lot of Earth-like areas are nicely contrasted to the snowy top sections, and the puzzles vary depending on the floor, but like I said earlier, they aren't very fun or interesting. Though my favorite puzzle is breaking the ice structures to hold up the temple to reach the boss door. That was pretty cool. The reason Snowhead is placed on this list is for what it does really well, and that would have to be the atmosphere item and the boss. I talked about the former two, so let's see what Got has... Wait. Got? Goat? Ugh. Everyone has struggled with pronouncing this thing's name, and I guess it's my turn now. Got, we'll go with that, is one of the best bosses in the series for sure. Using Goron Link, you must chase the speedy Got around the circular boss room. Got never stops moving until you damage it enough, so it attacks with shooting lasers out of its horn, making stalactites fall or boulders flying at you, and throwing bombs at you, of course. Got uses an onslaught of attacks at you while running away from you, and the key to winning is not taking risks with the rolling Goron move. After hitting Got's body enough, use the fire arrows to damage its eye. So that was the SNOWHEAD Temple. It had some ups and downs, but overall I really enjoyed this dungeon more than the previous ones. At the 12th spot, we have a very demented and creepy dungeon, the Palace of Twilight from Twilight Princess. So the entire game built up having Link and Midna enter the Twilight Realm and defeat the usurper King Zant. So this dungeon was not only going to house these events, but the area had to be creepier and more unsettling than all of the previous Twilight areas. Thankfully, the Palace of Twilight nails these categories. Let's talk about the layout first. As soon as you enter the Twilight Realm, you see 3 main buildings. 2 smaller ones on the right and left, and the middle one being tall and frightening. Weird dark fog prohibits Link from entering the main building, so you must find 2 balls of light to bring them to the outside area. This layout is really smart, and I absolutely love the puzzles. Every puzzle is fun, and being chased with the energy balls by the demonic hands is thrilling if a bit easy. The atmosphere is just as great. Even though this is obvious, but the Palace of Twilight has dark and light elements, and it mixes the two well. Once both balls of light have been taken to the outside area, Link receives the item of the dungeon. It's different from what you'd expect. The Master Sword gets enriched by light, and now Link is capable of pushing all dark fog away from him. Now here's my first issue with this dungeon. Once the Master Sword is powered up, you have to go back to both of the small buildings and get chests you missed. If you're 100%ing the game like me, this sucks because backtracking feels very forced, and I'd rather use the Master Sword more in the later sections than add usage in the earlier sections. Of course backtracking isn't an issue because of how small the whole dungeon is, right? I'm bothered by both of the backtracking and just how undercooked this dungeon is. Gordon Ramsay would probably call this raw. Jokes aside, in each of the small buildings Zant will appear, or rather, Phantom Zant. Phantom Zant is the mini-boss, and he will teleport around the room, copy himself, and will summon hundreds of foes at you at once, and it's super satisfying to take on these challenges. Both Phantom Zant fights are really good mini-bosses, but best is the actual fight with Zant. Many have called this the best fight in the entire series, and I see why. It's a culmination of many of Twilight Princess's boss and mini-boss fights with added bells and whistles, and even describing it doesn't do it justice, so I'll just play some footage for a bit. That was the Palace of Twilight. It has incredible atmosphere and theming, and puzzles are fun. All 3 of Zant's battles are especially great. It's just a shame that this dungeon could have been so much more, and because of that I'm going to have to put it at a lower ranking on this list. Once again, another Majora's Mask dungeon.
What? The Great Bay Temple? This dungeon sucks!
It really doesn't. It's great. So, what do I mean? Well, let's have a look. Great Bay Temple is designed with lots of machinery and factory workings that give this dungeon a very distinct look, and it adds to the water atmosphere. Now, at times this dungeon can feel very claustrophobic, but the compactness certainly gives the place an isolated vibe. The music includes many sounds of working machineries too. The Great Bay Temple relies on one main gimmick that the entire internet despises. Ocarina of Time's water temple required lowering and rising of water levels to progress, while Majora's Mask's water temple requires the changing of water currents. This can be annoying in the N64 version because it's timed with the Switch, but thankfully the 3DS version fixes that to 2 set stopping points, so that saved the whole dungeon, thank you. And the first room is such lever, which you will need to backtrack to throughout your time in the Great Bay Temple. It's honestly not bad considering how compact the layout of the temple is. It may take 2 or so minutes to change the current before you get back to where you were, which doesn't annoy me much. But anyways, let's talk about some of the interesting puzzles found here. The Zora mask allows you to swim throughout different tunnels, which grants you access to new areas. Some areas may be inaccessible at the time due to the water current pushing you in a certain direction away from other paths. One thing to note is that this temple isn't filled with as many puzzles as other Zelda dungeons. It's more focused on what I like to call paced exploration, where you aren't free to roam around, but if you do what the game requires to progress, you'll inch your way throughout the area. However, the puzzles that exist are mainly ones requiring the ice arrows. As I explained with the SNOWHEAD Temple, Majora's Mask uses elemental arrows as dungeon items after the WOODFALL Temple, so no surprise here. The ice arrows can freeze sections of the water, turning them into platforms, which can be used to reach new grounds. Also, machinery must be frozen to progress at certain points. In the N64 version, you could shoot wherever you wanted in the water, but in the 3DS version, only specific spots can be shot at. It makes sense, I guess, but the freedom was nice in the old version, though you could lose magic if you weren't smart. I really like the ice arrows, and they are used for almost all of the puzzles as I stated before. Now the mini-boss can be kind of an eyesore. Once you trigger the fight, by looking at the ceiling, use the hookshot to pull apart the bubbles surrounding the eye and look for an opening to stab at it. Use the arrows to also damage the eye. It's really simple but annoying because in the second half the creature charges at you really quickly and I'm never fast enough to evade it. After spamming arrow shots it will die and the ice arrows are yours. Now let's talk about the boss Georg. Now let me just say how horrible this fight in the N64 version is. The fight flat out sucked. The camera was unintuitive, there was no clear, efficient way of damaging Georg, and the massive fish did way too much damage to you. Thankfully, the 3DS version did a 180 with this fight. Georg will start by jumping out of the water to eat you, and you can damage its eye when it's done. Simple, fun. Now for the second phase, put on your Zora's mask and take a dive. Watch out for all the spike balls as you need those to damage Georg. When Georg tries to suck you into his mouth Kirby style, you need to break the chains on the spike balls so Georg will suck those in. Then go to wail at its eye. So I really like the Great Bay Temple. It doesn't introduce many challenging puzzles, but the exploration, Georg, and the atmosphere are all above standard. Skyward Sword overall had some really interesting dungeons, but many weren't quite worthy to make the list. The Fire Sanctuary on the surface looks kind of bland and forgettable, but it's actually a really cool dungeon, if a bit flawed. The aesthetics and atmosphere look very similar to the Earth Temple from Skyward Sword, but are different enough. The walls have detailed patterns, and parts of the dungeon are outside, which is really neat. Fire is obviously the key element here, with some earth theming as well, and I like how lava is a constant threat throughout the entire dungeon, which leads to many of the puzzles involving cooling lava into rock and platforming across lava rivers. Other games have done that style of platforming before, but it's a welcomed addition to Zelda. Let's talk about the Fire Sanctuary's layout. The dungeon has a couple floors, most of them being below ground, which is odd. Earlier in the game, Link picks up digging mitts, but he receives an expansion to them, now being able to crawl underground and explore under the sanctuary. I both like and dislike this item. For one, it's unique, but you have to dig and crawl way too much in the dungeon, and it's a huge departure from the normal gameplay. I wish I could like the item of the temple, but I really can't. The atmosphere also isn't that fantastic, as it feels like a fire dungeon. It may not look much like a fire dungeon in some areas, but it feels like one, and that's kind of a problem. So what does the Fire Sanctuary do right? Oh, well, the puzzles, mini-boss, and the boss. Many puzzles that don't require digging in the Fire Sanctuary's Earth-like areas have the use of water bulbs that will either cool parts of lava or allow Link to access certain items and goodies. The mixing of water and fire was very well done and super intuitive, with the Wii Remote being used to swing the water bulbs from the sword into the Switch holders. Now, my favorite part of the entire dungeon is the skydiving section. You know the one. There are two lizard heads that act as entrances far below the main section of the main dungeon, and by reading a plaque you can decide which to jump off and land on. If you pick the correct one, a tongue will appear and that you can land on. Awesome and very original. Now how about the mini-boss? The Dark Lizal foes pose a great challenge and obviously take advantage of your sword abilities in Skyward Sword. And the boss is a second fight with Girhim, and it goes without saying how fun it is. The Demon Lord will throw lots of sharp diamonds at you that must be considered when it comes to shield bashing strategies. Even up close he can block with his dark swords. Not to mention to add on Girhim, as I want to save lots of boss discussion on this countdown for one entirely on Zelda bosses down the line. Now, that's all you get for now. So the Fire Sanctuary gets a lot of things right that make other dungeons look worse in comparison. The best way I could describe the Fire Sanctuary is, it's solid overall. Ocarina of Time's Shadow Temple featured the element of darkness, and in twisted forms not seen in the series before it. The Shadow Temple isn't just a creepy dungeon though, it has smart puzzles, juicy lore, and a very neat layout. The Shadow Temple was built for prisoners, some of the worst people to ever live in Hyrule specifically. However, it has long been abandoned, as that can be seen with just how dirty the ground and walls are. Many of the walls have cracks in them, and frightening statues and imagery is present in the temple throughout. The layout of the dungeon spoon feeds you with many aspects of the temple's past and lore. One section features invisible spikes, while other sections feature prison cells and execution rooms. The Shadow Temple totally wins me over with its atmosphere and theming. This dungeon features text given by dead skulls and lots of re-deads. I have to talk about the hover boots, which are the item for this dungeon. These boots allow you to hover above the ground for a short time, and it's incredibly fun to use with the wind puzzles. Even just crossing gaps with the hover boots is fun. All of the enemies are hard to deal with for one reason or another, many of the reasons having to do with fighting them in platforming sections or in super tight corridors. Something else I like about the temple is, well, just how difficult it is. Many contraptions that can cause quick deaths are present, and many difficult platforming segments with the hover boots are present as well. Now the best part of the dungeon is the ride on the boat ship. Simply hop on it, and it will take you to a long platform in close quarters with the boss room. Now let's turn around, we forgot about the mini-boss. Oh, this thing is special. I have no words, it's scary in the definition of nightmare fuel. It's not fun to fight, and it's easy or hard depending on how well you can space yourself from the hands, but it doesn't need to be fun, as it's scary, and that's what makes up for it. That's what the fight is. Now, Bongo Bongo is the boss of the temple, and it's pretty awesome, if a bit easy. The platform is a massive drum to which Bongo Bongo will slam with his hands. Using the hover boots will prolong your time in the air, giving you a better shot with your arrows to stun it in the eye. Stunning the boss with your arrows allows you to slash it to smithereens. And that's the Shadow Temple. It's an experience no one will ever forget, and it has a lot more to it than just atmosphere. Arbiter's Grounds is by far the scariest dungeon in the series, and it's very similar to the Shadow Temple in a lot of ways, but beats out in comparison. Arbiter's Grounds is a prison set far out in the Gerudo Desert where all of Hyrule's worst criminals went and perished, very similar to the Shadow Temple. This dungeon features sand and dark elemental themes, and uses the two very well together. Many sections of the dungeon feature sand and quicksand, and some of which can stop your ways of progression by slowing you down. The layout is purely brilliant. Arbiter's Grounds is divided into 3 sections, the last of which is above the temple where the Mirror Chamber presides. The first section requires the hunting down of 3 Poes to open a door that leads to the second section. This part is very fun as it well incorporates the switching between Link and Wolf Link. Some exploration will be required to find all of the Poes. Arbiter's Grounds is one of the darkest areas in the series, both literally and emotionally. I can't stress that enough. Arbiter's Grounds also has some of the best puzzles I've ever played, including ones involving raising chandeliers, turning doors, and lighting up rooms. The best use is the dungeon's item, which I'll get to later. The mini-boss of the dungeon is Death Sword, a creepy monster that is invisible. Using Wolf Link's senses you can attack it, and in the second phase, it will become visible and Link's bow will do the job from there. This mini-boss uses its sword to attack, and it's fun to dodge as you need to dodge at the very last second to counterattack. Death Sword is very fun to fight. I just wish that, it had more health so I could fight it longer, but oh well. The spinner is the item of the dungeon and acts like a Beyblade. Link will ride it as you connect with rails to go over gaps. It has some really good momentum to it and is incredibly fun to use in the final 2 rooms before the boss of Arbiter's Grounds. The spinner can also attack enemies and ride over sand, so for how unique it is, it does fit the dungeon it debuts in quite well. The boss is Stalord, a massive dinosaur fossil majigger that will protect its vulnerable spine by summoning dead soldiers? Oh, I think this got way dark. Use the spinner carefully to whiz down the surface and spin at Stalord's spine. There's a second phase, though. Stalord's head will try to attack you while you ride up a shaft, and it's your job to ram into it and slash it with your sword stuck in. Wow, that's a boss fight. Arbiter's Grounds hits on every mark that makes a good dungeon, and I can't really find anything wrong with it. It hits well on every single note. Well, except for those Re-Dead nights. One of the greatest surprises Twilight Princess gave us was the appearance of the Temple of Time from Ocarina of Time. Who knew that beyond the Master Sword hidden inside a stained glass window, that there was a whole other dungeon to explore? I guess that means that the Mirror of Twilight had to have been created before the events of Ocarina of Time, but let's not go into the Zelda timeline tangents. The Temple of Time's layout is very fun to travel through. Usually saying that a dungeon has many floors is a bad thing, but here there aren't that many doors per floor, so you won't get as lost as you would in the SNOWHEAD or Wind Temple. The music and atmosphere gives off a very mysterious vibe, and honestly, I could hear this theme all day. This dungeon has the light elemental theme, with many of the windows and the brightness reflecting a beautiful church or cathedral, and this vibe makes the dungeon alone for me. The Temple of Time gives the player a goal. To access the boss, and the piece of the Mirror of Twilight, a missing statue must be returned to the door. Using Wolf Link's nose, you can gain the statue's scent and investigate the dungeon for it. So all of this stuff is good and all, but what does the item of the dungeon do, and how can it transport the statue? Oh, my friend, you have not met the Dominion Rod yet, have you? This rod of magic is one of the most creative things I've seen in a game. Link can use the rod to chuck a small sphere of green light that can possess statues, big or small. Once you defeat the Darknut mini-boss, you backtrack to the first room while manipulating the statue with the Dominion Rod. The statue can smash things in its way, and it obviously can't fit through doors, so instead you guide it to the large bells that transport the statue to the next room and beyond. This whole dungeon kind of sounds like an escort mission, but there's no danger of losing the statue, and there's no time limit whatsoever, so you can take your time. The Temple of Time houses many difficult enemy encounters, and none will quite live up to the mini-boss. The Darknut is a fantastic fight. It's best to use the Helm Splitter, or if you're really good, the Backslash, to initiate a chain of attacks on the knight. Once its armor falls off, it chucks its large sword at you and becomes much quicker with its attacks. Eventually, you'll win. The Darknut is a fantastic battle, and the atmosphere of the room stays memorable to me to this very day. The Temple of Time thankfully doesn't skimp out on puzzles because of the statue escort section. Many involve using the bow to move doors, placing small statues on switches, or simply exploring and fighting Lizalfos. My absolute favorite thing about this dungeon is the rotating elevator room. It's fun to go up and down with a nice clear view of the temple. Now the boss creeps me out. Armagoma is an enhanced version of the one seen in the Great Deku Tree from Ocarina of Time, and it looks very realistic. I'm scared of spiders, by the way. I hate this thing for that, but the fight is actually pretty good. Armagoma will fire a laser from the ceiling that I swear will always hit Link if you don't roll in different directions. Other than that, it will give birth to small spiders just to annoy you. After hitting its eye with the bow, use the Dominion Rod to command one of the 4 large statues to crush the spider. Never gets old. After a couple times, the spider will die. That's hilarious. And after some more effort, Armagoma will go down. The Temple of Time introduced us to a revolutionary item, wonderful and unexplored atmosphere in the series, and great puzzles, as well as everything else I mentioned before. The sand ship is like no other dungeon. First of all, you're on a ship in the middle of the desert. Talk about isolation. There are practically no enemies on the boat as well. Let's start with the best things about the sand ship and we'll work our way down to the worst. First and best of all is the dungeon's layout. The ship has a deck you can explore, and you can also explore the inside of the ship itself. This may sound elementary, but who doesn't want to explore a massive sand ship? Many sections of the ship are not powered and are filled with heavy amounts of sand. However, this dungeon has one overarching puzzle, the time shift stones seen earlier in Skyward Sword. There's only one time stone, and the entire dungeon is at the top with the flag of the ship. In order to switch between time eras, which will allow you to access new things, you must get the bow, the dungeon's item. Many areas in the dungeon will have holes in the ceiling so that you can power up your shot and hit the stone. Absolutely splendid idea. The mini-boss is definitely the best one we've seen so far, with Skirvo. Skirvo will use powerful attacks that can only be blocked with pure skill from the player. Both Link and Skirvo are walking on the plank, and by doing damage to the captain, you can actually push him backwards. Eventually Skirvo will fall into the sand and to be forgotten completely, and as well as dead. Now the bow is used for the time stone, but is needed for the boss too, of course. The elemental theming this time around is sand and machinery. The many machine-like areas are found inside the sand ship and in the past era. The sand ship looks very bleak in the present, of course, so don't look for any flowers here. Once the boss key has been applied to the boss door, the entire ship starts to shake, water rises, and tension builds. This was genius! Such a great moment that's memorable too. This whole scenario felt like I was on the Titanic when it was sinking. You end up outside the boat with what's still floating, and you see a giant version of Mike Wazowski? And that's the boss. The atmosphere is wonderful, but the fight itself is actually pretty awful. Yeah, I said that. This is the worst part of the sand ship, to be honest. I feel like the fight was rushed, and it's very repetitive and frankly kind of stupid in design. Overall, the sand ship is such a unique and well-executed dungeon that no dungeon could replicate it without being a copy or knockoff. Well done, Nintendo. Deep within Hyrule's snowy mountain chain is a single mansion owned by 2 Yetis. You walk into the mansion and your mind is blown. The SNOWPEAK ruins is like no other dungeon in the series, and in many ways not just one. It's the first room, the foyer. It's very poorly lit and freezing with parts of the floor being pure ice. How atmospheric. In the next room is one of the Yetis, Yetta, who is sick and resting at the fireplace. She gives Link a map of where she thinks the Mirror of Twilight is. Oh, okay. Stop right there. Look at how amazing this dungeon is already. We walk into a mansion, isolated from the world, and we meet a living Yeti who is also willing to let a stranger walk around her house and look for something. What the hell? This dungeon has a weird but cool layout, obviously. Pun intended. The atmosphere is of ice with a little snow, and the stone-like walls contrast the ice very nicely. The SNOWPEAK ruins is very nice to look at, but the visuals aren't that special, except for the cozy insides and the wonderful paintings on the wall that make these contrasting atmospheres well. Yeto can be found making soup and offers Link some anytime you need some health. These people are very friendly. Now for the real deal, the mansion itself has very neat puzzles. My favorites being using the cannon to launch iron balls throughout ice, and transporting said iron balls through a mechanism, and using Wolf Link to dig up chests and whatnot. Best of all is what Link obtains after the mini-boss. Darkhammer is easily one of my favorite mini-bosses in the series. This armored lizard will swing his unique ball and chain at you, which does so much damage it's not even funny. So as this thing approaches you, quickly pull out your claw shot and aim for one of the blue targets. Then you get behind it and slash its tail. The ball and chain is your reward, and while the item isn't used a lot after the SNOWPEAK ruins, inside the dungeon it's pretty fantastic. After several times going to a chest that did not contain a piece of Mirror of Twilight, and several times of getting shoved over by Yeto, and several times of Yetta changing her mind, you enter the bedroom. With a creepy start, Blizetta's fight begins, and honestly, it's not that great of a fight. While the music and atmosphere is really good, and the game is taking itself very seriously here, it's super satisfying to slam her with the ball and chain as well. But it's too simple. That's the problem. And that's really all I have to say on the boss fight. The SNOWPEAK ruins had a great environment, amazing item, and mini-boss. I do find those things true with the dungeon, but the real reason it's actually placed this high is for its originality. While the SNOWPEAK ruins quickly turned from many Zelda fans' least favorite to favorite dungeon in Twilight Princess, sometimes being different isn't a bad thing. So, the music already piques your exploration of the heavens, eh? City in the Sky is just one of those dungeons, the one that makes you feel like an experience with being a pure 100% immersive experience for the player. Okay, I may be trying to sell this thing like a product on TV, but let's be honest. So what if you got lost? So what if the music is repetitive? This dungeon from the end of Twilight Princess's long quest is controversial, at least when it came out in 2006. But some people have grown onto it, and when I played Twilight Princess, I loved it immediately. Sky dungeons aren't very common in the series, and literally hasn't been done in a 3D setting before Twilight Princess. Not even the entirety of Skyward Sword lived up to the dungeon's literal atmosphere. And no, I'm not trying to burn Skyward Sword on that, but that's just how good I feel the emotion is behind this place. City in the Sky is the place where the Oku live. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. These creepy small bird creatures call this floating city home, and it's unique to explore a place like this and still call it a dungeon. Many small details such as the doors and platforms feel unique and different from what's familiar too. The layout has inside and outside segments with many floors, but is organized by going into a building and coming out on a different floor. If you don't understand what I just said, just think of Skytown Elysia from Metroid Prime 3 and you'll know what I mean. A massive dragon comes to one of the bridges connecting the floating buildings and destroys it. Now you can't go to that building until you have the dungeon item. City in the Sky's layout can be confusing, but makes sense in my opinion. Now, the only elemental theme going here is wind, and it's not that present. In some of the inside areas, you will find fans that can be used in conjunction with the Oku to fly, but that's about it. Oh, except for, most of the outside areas pushing you backwards. I love Link's animation when running towards the wind. You'd think that falling off platforms would be an issue here, but it won't happen often unless you take a long time on the falling blue blocks. The mini-boss is an DINOFOLS. These lizards can fly, of course, and the duel with it in the superbly vast room is awesome. Use the claw shot before it charges at you, and you will drag it with its shield toward you. It's super satisfying to do, by the way. Hurting it enough times will lead to its death, and the item is yours. In fact, it's the same one you already got in the Lakebed Temple. Another claw shot. The double claw shots are a lot of people's favorite item, and it's one of mine too. You can't help but feel like Spider-Man swinging around sometimes. Now with this ability, Link can cross the broken bridge and solve more puzzles. The puzzles are good, thankfully. I wouldn't call them the best, but they are good. A lot of it becomes using the double claw shots to traverse and not really figuring anything out, but City in the Sky has lots of areas that require pulling down weights with iron boots and other things to spice it up. The boss is the dragon seen before, Argarok. Simply claw shot it as it comes down and pull it down with the iron boots. That's only the first phase though. A lightning storm will soon occur and the whole arena becomes windy and drenched with atmosphere. Link goes extremely high up that I'm worried about air pressure to reach Argarok, and then he must dodge its fire breath by claw-shotting the Peahats and moving swiftly. Get around to its back and slay the beast. Really, really good boss it is. City in the Sky has a lot of solid aspects to it, and it has always remained one of my favorite Zelda dungeons in The Legend of Zelda. It may not be your favorite, but that's okay with me. I know you are surprised that the Stone Tower Temple isn't at the #1 spot. All I can say is why this temple is amazing and what my one issue is with it. The Stone Tower Temple's elemental theme is light and earth. Stone Tower Temple is obviously made out of stone and the appearance of the walls are very well made. This dungeon is high up in the sky and it's a lovely contrast to the stone. A huge variety is present and all 3 mask transformations from Majora's Mask are used in this very one temple. Deku Link is used to fly, Goron Link is used to walk in lava, and Zora Link is used to swim through the water sections. I'd say that all the forms including the normal Link get the amount of time to shine that they deserve, and to balance this is difficult, I understand. The layout of Stone Tower Temple is very complex with many varying spots and level geometry, and a map that doesn't truly show where things are due to awkward floor shifts. That's when the game considers you on a new level or floor. Using the mirror shield, many light puzzles can be solved, and it's fun to do. Many doors and areas require statues to be placed on switches to enter or go through, and this is where the Elegy of Emptiness comes in. I said I only had one issue with this dungeon, but it's actually 2. Playing the Elegy over and over again gets really irritating, especially on repeat playthroughs. The statues are creepy, which is neat and all, I get it, but I got tired of it quickly and I still do. Now, the Stone Tower Temple actually has 2 unique mini-bosses, which is super cool. The first is the Garrow Master. He's super fun to fight, if a bit too defensive. Defeating the Master will give you the light arrows. Now this is where the unthinkable happens. You actually have to go outside the temple, turn it upside down by shooting a light arrow at the symbol of the temple entrance. That's crazy. Now there are bottomless pits everywhere, that being the actual sky. Now, the atmosphere is even scarier and darker, while really amping up the difficulty when the Stone Tower Temple is upside down. The second mini-boss is Gomez, basically the Grim Reaper. It uses bats to shield itself from your attacks, but his attacks are actually very devastating. The bats will always respawn too, so give it some arrows when you can. Now, my last issue with the Stone Tower Temple is how hard it is to get the stray fairies. I don't mean location-wise, but on the 3-day time limit, and with time slowed down, and with the amount of backtracking required to get them in this dungeon, I feel like it's too difficult for one trip without a guide. Now the boss. In the N64 version, Twin Mode was basically a very bland shoot fight with your arrows. That's essentially what it was, except for using the Giant's Mask. Now in the 3DS version, here's what you need to do. First shoot all of the eyes, and then get the Giant's Mask, and punch Twin Mole basically until it dies. It's a great boss fight. All in all, I wasn't too harsh on the Stone Tower Temple, see? It's a fantastic temple, which is why it takes the #3 slot. Another favorite among many, I have the Ancient Cistern at #2. This dungeon obviously oozes with atmosphere and has neat lore behind it I'll get to later. This water dungeon uses water and light as its elemental theming, and that alone sounds enticing. Then you look at the dungeon's design and layout. There's lots of gold and other bold colors that really bring out Skyward Sword's art style. The layout is only a couple floors with nothing too interesting, but that doesn't matter because of the main attraction. The main statue area in the middle has many floors, and you must solve many puzzles to climb it, requiring the item of the dungeon. This dungeon also has lots of scope, no matter where you are. Not long into the dungeon, as there really isn't much you can do other than swim around, you will encounter the mini-boss, which is a Stall Master. This thing looks hard, and it is if you aren't prepared. Time your hits and shield bashes well is all the advice I have. Again, another fight that takes advantage of the Wii Remote's controls in the game. The item you get is the whip, which can be used to pull levers out of reach. It can also be used to turn knobs and when dealing with enemies, and I really like it. Now, this dungeon's atmosphere is incredible with the heaven-like setting, but there's something you didn't expect to it. The basement floors look like hell. The heaven and hell contrast was designed intentionally, and you'll find it interesting. I have to give lots of credit for the atmospheric shift. Well done, Nintendo. Once you get the boss key and you have nothing more to do and try and run away from all of the quote-unquote zombies, you'll see a single thread that leads to the heavens, and Link will climb it, though many enemies will try and catch up to you and pull you down. This was in reference to the Spider's Thread, which is a tale about someone climbing out of hell and being taken down from doing so. Now, that's a very crude way of explaining it, I know, but let's finish up by talking about the puzzles and the boss. The puzzles with the whip are splendid, and the swimming is fun too. Even platforming is made fun by flipping over lily pads. Now, Galactos is just one of the best bosses ever. This ancient machine has been taken over by dark matter, and let's just let the footage play out like with Xant's battle. And that was the Ancient Cistern, a beautiful dungeon that is fun to explore, and truly a work of art. Few areas in games can achieve such atmosphere and emotion as Ocarina of Time's Spirit Temple. I'll save my emotional connection to this dungeon at the end. The Spirit Temple's layout and the temple itself cannot be explored all at once. You must place the Master Sword back into the pedestal and come back as young Link and go into the dungeon. Yes, this dungeon is split in half for both Links. Is that awesome or what? Young Link encounters Nabooru, Garuda woman who wants to find the treasure within the sacred temple, the silver gauntlets, but you can't fit into the crawl space. She tasks you of finding them for her, and so Link crawls into the space and begins his adventure. Now that you are a young Link, you have access to all of your old weapons and every single one is put to use. Many rooms have deadly traps and many puzzles will involve the slingshot, bombs, and boomerang in some way. Many challenging obstacles are thrown at you, and let me be clear, this isn't an easy temple. The aesthetics of the temple look beautiful with the sand element everywhere. The temple's darkly lit, and lots of steel and metal can be found to contrast the tan walls and floor. None of the puzzles in the Young Link section are too interesting, but the ones involving the room where the suns must be lit are very fun. Young Link is a daring boy entering this dungeon, but his last stop before the Silver Gauntlets is its guardian, the Iron Knuckle. Many Zelda fans have said how inspiring and amazing this mini-boss battle is, and I agree. The Iron Knuckle is so strong it's disgusting. Carefully evading the knight is difficult, but with patience, your weak Kokiri sword will strike enough. The next room is outside on the statue of the Desert Colossus, where a chest with the silver gauntlets lie. Kibora Gibora actually appears for a surprise and warns you about the future of the temple. Once that's done, you see Nabooru get abducted by two witches, which is horrible. With the silver gauntlets still with you, you become Adult Link and use them to push a stone that blocked the right wing out of the way. Now with the rest of the Spirit Temple. All of the rooms appear similar to the Young Link section in style. This time the puzzles are harder and there are more light puzzles than before. At the end of Adult Link's road is yet another Iron Knuckle, but now with your stronger sword it's much easier to fight. Outside you get the Mirror Shield as the true dungeon item. Many of the final rooms of the dungeon, once you backtrack, have mirrors that need your shield to be reflected into suns, or in case of the goddess statue, break its face to reveal the boss room entrance. How creative. And for the third time you fight an Iron Knuckle, but it's actually just a mind-controlled Naboru inside the iron. And now the boss, Twinrova, the same witches that abducted Naburo so many years ago. Use the mirror shield to deflect the ice attacks at the fire witch, and vice versa. In the second phase, you charge up your shield with one of the elements and shoot it back at Twinrova so that you can slash her with your mighty sword. And that was the Spirit Temple. Now for my story. This dungeon has a deep connection with me, which is why it's at number 1, along with a list of all the other qualities I gave the dungeon. I'm enriched and engrossed by its atmosphere and emotional feeling. The Spirit Temple houses feelings of depression and the unknown, and I am still in awe to this day. I also love the theory surrounding it, with the Quad Force last piece being the goddess's possession, the very one the large statue in the temple has. It's truly incredible. The Spirit Temple is the definition of atmosphere, smart design, and creativity, so I must pay my respects to it by placing it the highest slot on my rankings of the top 15 Zelda dungeons. Phew, that was a long list with a lot to say. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy day to watch this countdown. Many Zelda dungeons stand out for many different reasons, and I know that some of your favorites probably did not make the list, but tell me them in the comments below, and if you really enjoyed this countdown or not. Also, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content, including Zelda and other Nintendo things. Alrighty, thank you for tuning in. This was Innocent Christoph Gavin, signing out.